Right. So are we seeing this? All good?
Yes, looks good.
All right. That's awesome. So I'm also using Excalibur, like Dimitri, for the good looks of the presentation. So yeah, again, like we're seeing new modules coming live. So here on the screen, you can sort of see um, how it looks on a high level, right? We have users depositing ETH into Lido, getting STETH back, and basically the staking router distributing ETH to the different modules. Right now, it's for the most part the curated module, but we have new modules coming live as the simple DVT module and the community staking module. And ultimately, there needs to be like a way to decide what where these ETH should be distributed from the Lido DAO. So as of now, we have like some sort of like low testing amounts of ETH that are being just like allocated towards modules to prove sort of their viability in the simple DB case, to not risk too much money there, but and also to check if everything works as expected. But essentially, we don't really know how it should look in the long run. So my focus of this Lego funded research was to sort of look at what kind of distribution methods exist, or like sort of how could you do this distribution, and then also provide some context and like kind of a framework to evaluate the different methods. So that's what I'm going to do. Oops, if I manage to understand. Yeah. So the structure of the research. So there's a research report that I will also link in the chat in a second, or I think it will also be in the description of the recording, and the slides will also be there. So for people that want to look into it later, where I basically kind of run through everything that I'm going to try to condense into the 20 minutes I have here. So basically the goal is again to identify how the StakingRouter could handle the ETH distribution to modules. I'm talking essentially about characteristics of modules, how like they work on a high level, sort of the constraints of what we're faced with when we are thinking about how to distribute ETH to modules as Lido. Then I'm looking at the different distribution mechanisms that could be used. Like, I'm going to dive a bit more into that, but essentially how could choices be made of how the ETH should be distributed. And then there is a section essentially trying to evaluate the viability of the different paths, taking into account different criteria, for example, also the cost associated with the implementation, or like the complexity, but also, sort of more nuanced things like how well a certain distribution mechanism might kind of align with Lido's goals. So as many might know, Lido DAO voted on recently on the Goose goals, and there's a bunch of like sort of things in there that Lido aims to achieve. And in the end, the distribution method that is used to distribute ETH to the different modules should reflect these goals, right? So I'm trying to build a framework and identify sort of the elements of these goals, and then see how certain methods meet these criteria. The thing is, it's a bit subjective. So in my report, I'm trying to like give my view. It is kind of meant to be used by other stakeholders to also, go through the same process essentially, and ultimately Lido DAO at large deciding probably how this should be done in the future. So this research kind of forms the basis to provide everyone with the right context. Right. So talking about kind of the characteristics of modules. So, like modules are not that different in the sense, and they can differentiate sort of on the way how they structure the fees. So that's basically, in the curated module, 5% go to the Lido DAO, 5% go to the operators. In a simple DVT, the structure is more tilted towards the operators and additionally the DVT providers, so the technology partners that Lido is working with to realize the simple DVT module. So in that sense, modules can differ based on this. And in CSM, it's going to be even different probably. There are some details open there yet, of course. There's also the operator registry. So that's essentially, which operators are actually whitelisted in the specific module. In the curated module, this evaluation is done through the onboarding waves and the work that the NOCC is doing. Essentially, once an operator is in there, they just have to like add keys and are able to receive ETH from Lido. In other modules, like the CSM, this might require you to put up a self-bond and be more permissionless. So there's a difference, essentially, what the operators of a certain module are. And connected with the keys, as we know, in Ethereum, you have to run a bunch of validators, depending on how much ETH gets allocated to you. A module essentially has a certain capacity of how many validators it can operate, depending on how many keys are provided by the underlying operators. So this is another thing that can be tracked or is tracked by the StakingRouter actually, and potentially like limits of capacity could exist in the case of, let's say, the community staking module, when the bond is too high, or like operators don't have that much capital to put up for bond. It might be that they are limited in terms of how much stake could actually be distributed to this module without there being like idle ETH not actually validating, which is definitely something that Lido as a protocol wants to avoid. So capacity is an important factor in deciding where ETH should go. There's also differences in terms of like the internal distribution to operators within the module. So for example, most of the modules right now use like a sort of simple algorithm that tries to equalize between the different operators that have capacity. But there could probably also be different methods where it's like more stake-based or who knows what, right? I guess the idea of the StakingRouter in the long run is that new module builders can come and present their module and get stake from Lido and be rewarded for their work. There's also differences in terms of slashing coverage that a module can have. So like in the community staking module, the operator is actually providing bond that covers for their performance and like minor slashings. In the curated module, it's actually more done through like sort of the curation by the NOCC that tries to vet operators so that no slashings or underperformance happens. In case it does happen, there has actually been a few cases where the operators did themselves cover for their losses. I am also looking at the amounts and kind of the incidents in the report itself, how much that was. So for people that are interested in that, look at this. And ultimately, there's like a big thing that I kind of group under performance and decentralization metrics here, where the modules will obviously in the end differ in terms of how much APY they generate and maybe how much they contribute to decentralization metrics. It's not really clear, but one could like think of a sort of decentralization score or like have different dimensions of decentralization that a module contributes to. So obviously we want a diverse set of node operators, like geographically and jurisdictionally diverse, and have a bunch of solo stakers. So overall, the modules will differ there, and we might need, might want to take that into account if we think about how to give ETH to modules, which will end up with these operators. Right. So what are the constraints that we are facing sort of in this question of how ETH should be distributed to modules? Like one is the capacity. So as I already talked about, module operators in the end need to supply the validator keys to be able to like run Ethereum validators. This could be limiting if the module is very strict requirements or high self-bond. So this is one thing that the protocol needs to take into account. The other thing is the implications of the Ethereum queues, or like in general opportunity costs associated with the process of migrating stake between modules. So one of the things is right now, most of the ETH in Lido is already staked with the curated module. At this point, to introduce a new module or like change stake to a new module might require exiting some of the validators there and like entering into the queue again to run into the new module. I'm talking a bit more about this in the report. What are like sort of other paths that could exist? So for example, just using new stake that comes into Lido, or even alternative approaches in terms of like Ethereum supporting validator rotation or other ways that could achieve it. But in practice, it's likely that exiting and re-entering might be required if there's like a large migration of validators, and this comes at a cost to Lido DAO and the STETH holders. So it really needs to be considered when you think about how you want to decide on which modules get how much stake. In practice, I'm doing a sensitivity analysis, so I'm actually linking this sheet here, but obviously you won't be able to click the link right now. I'll again link everything in the notes or in the chat after this. Essentially, we're doing a sensitivity analysis in terms of what it would cost to migrate, for example, 5% of current Lido stake, which turns out to be around 14,500 validators, and at current ETH prices. So this sheet has like a bunch of inputs that I like updated yesterday, and at this around currently prevailing 3.5% APY, it would cost almost 1.5 million in terms of like opportunity cost to STETH stakers, that like collective of STETH stakers and their Lido DAO. That is lost basically by validators being idle in this migration process. This cost can also increase if you're, for example, trying to exit everyone at once and fill up the Ethereum queues. So in that case, you might like unnecessarily create opportunity costs, and obviously a good distribution method would avoid such a scenario and basically spread out the activations over time, and take a bunch of things into consideration. So for those who are interested, this is like an analysis I did with like some help also from Max from Lido, so thanks there for the help. And yeah, interesting kind of problem to look at. Right, finally, or like more or less towards the end, I'm looking at the actual ways how this distribution can be done. So I talked a lot about this, how should the ETH be distributed. Is essentially in crypto systems, we have a few options, especially related to stake. One is governance-based, so I'm trying to group them into like categories. One is like sort of governance-based, which means it's decided basically one by a committee that is being voted into by governance, or directly voted on by the LDO holders, for example. So it could be that I'm seeing something in the chat additionally. Oh, yeah. That you vote frequently on like this module should get 5%, the other one 5 and 10, and some sort of frequency this vote happens, let's say every year, and then it's updated, or some differences can exist there. So this is something that I'm trying to like outline what are the options there, and if you wanted to go with a governance-based method. There are also token-based methods. So it's like the most known one is probably the curve gauge. If people are familiar, like curve holders can essentially lock up their token and direct the rewards from the curve system towards different pools. So essentially, in a similar way, one could imagine that LDO or maybe even STETH could be used to determine where the ETH that is deposited into Lido, to which module it goes towards. So essentially, it could look like the token holders decide which modules they want to like support. There are questions here around, like how should it increase the voting power if you lock your tokens for longer? So this is actually a way also of giving like some sort of token utility potentially to LDO. But as we know from Curve, derivative structures can emerge from like sort of a system like this, with the Curve wars and like bribes and Convex or other protocols that are basically then some sort of protocol that tries to optimize it for the users, that they don't need to lock up so long their tokens and get liquidity on them. So it is a bit of a question if you want that. That's kind of a downside of the system, but again, it is relatively flexible. So that might be interesting. And then the other method that I'm predominantly looking at is like kind of algorithmic approach. So essentially trying to score modules on basis of a bunch of variables. Most importantly, probably like state concentration of the operators within the module, the soft and like kind of hardware distribution. So, where is the hardware running? What sort of clients are they running? The performance, like attestation rate, skin in the game, such as like bonds. So an algorithm might be developed to try and score which module performs best on these dimensions, and try to essentially have that take the distribution, or have that determine the distribution. I'm doing a little bit of a literature review of what's out there already in the proof of stake ecosystem. Most notably, also research done for Lego on this dimension in Ethereum. So that's like a really interesting one. Rated also has done a lot of work here, and then there's other like projects in the Solana and Cosmos ecosystem predominantly that have looked at this, trying to like find on-chain metrics that you could use essentially to determine stake distribution. And then there's finally like sort of a hybrid of these methods. So you might have a curve system on the algorithm, which gets like, I guess, a bit complicated and maybe a bit too overkill, but like kind of interesting to think about. So one of the issues, and that's kind of goes into the evaluation part, is that obviously the easiest path is doing like the governance-based one. And so you can basically like, has little overhead. It can be like implement fuzzy factors that maybe aren't going to be able to be caught by data that needs to be on chain. And maybe it's less over indexing on performance like a token-based system might be. So that is probably a good status quo. But essentially in this evaluation, I'm trying to look at other factors that might impact which kind of path the Lido DAO should follow. And that's obviously like kind of a stakeholder decision that's pretty important. So the final sort of chapter of this research looks at the goals and tries to like score the different distribution styles on sort of how well they hit these goals. So one is like contributor growth, right? We want Lido DAO to be decentralized and have different teams contributing to it. So which of the distribution methods, so the way teams are attracted is probably through being paid in the long run and having like a business model. So a distribution method that they understand how they can get ETH towards their module will probably help attract them. Also, which enables the widest stakeholder participation. So in some ways, LDO holders maybe want some say, or even STETH holders. So also trying to look at what is the best here from my perspective, right? Obviously, again, here opinions can differ a bit. Then another dimension might be decentralization. Which method helps to increase censorship resistance of Ethereum, like one of the goals of Ethereum, of Lido and also Ethereum. And how resilient is the system to corruption? So for example, if it's like a governance system, but there's like a committee of 3 people, maybe they could be bribed to change like sort of the votes towards a module that pays them a bribe or of sorts, and then disregarding some of these other things. So that can be a problem. Also performance. We had STETH holders care about like the rewards they're getting, and they're staking with Lido because of like the security and also obviously the well-performing node operators. So we're trying to like look into like what could be the best to like increase the APY. This might also actually mean considering the opportunity cost of the migrations I've talked about, but can also like take into account things like restaking or alternative ways of earning additional yields, essentially. And then ultimately, like one of the most important ones, probably the risk, like which method. Obviously, there's like a lot of money within Lido, and bugs and other like risky things could like impact this. So we need to evaluate which sort of method is the least prone to risks. And so probably like a simple system does better here on this dimension because it is like easier to understand. And but yeah, there's a bunch of things in this category that the one needs to like look at. So yeah, again, thanks for letting me present on this. I hope I brought some interesting points up and getting people interested to read the entire thing. So it's like a research report. Also feel free to tag me or ping me on @FelixLTS in Telegram or Twitter. I should have written this somewhere here, but I think hopefully people get that. Yeah, overall, I think the conclusion is of the report is, Lido is evolving. We have new modules going live, simple DVT, and like new modules in development, like community staking. There needs to be a clear method for how we distribute the stake to these modules. Yeah, the research report tries to look at those ways and tries to like kind of lay a groundwork to help the Lido DAO move forward. I think StakingRouter is really great invention and great design. So like, yeah, hopeful to see it flourish. And yeah, thanks so much to Lego for funding the research and for you guys to have me on presenting here. Open to take questions, or if we have the time. I don't know how long I actually took right now.
No, we have some time, Felix. Thanks first of all for the presentation and the research, of course. I was a bit surprised by the cost of migration. You added those in one of the earlier sheets.
Yeah,
they're quite massive. Could you go back to that? That's migrating. I think it was 14,000.
Yeah, I can even like if I can maybe even share no, sorry, not this, the sensitivity analysis directly. So we essentially looking at some different scenarios of APYs and validators that are being migrated, taking into account sort of the entire exit queue. So you need like 27 hours to exit validator plus whatever the queue is. And there's a bunch of things that need to happen for an exit to actually happen. So we're trying to add up this minimal time, and basically then in that time you're not earning rewards. So like we're multiplying that by the reward of that APY, and it comes out at like pretty much, because I guess, yeah, in the end there's a lot of stake in Lido. So if you just churn 5%, that's actually quite a lot of it's billions of dollars. So
yes,
it turns out to be quite expensive to do something like this.
Yeah, and the queue isn't even that long currently, I think. Although the sweep there's a lot of active validators, like almost 1 million, I think, or maybe over 1 million already. So
Exactly.
the sweep is like, I think it's 8 days. We've seen some massive withdrawals in the past week. Like they're all just a few small, I think 3 or 4 small large addresses doing withdrawals, and they all, I don't know, maybe they called each other. They all did it in the same week. We had massive withdrawals, and it just clogs up the queue. So we've been waiting for those withdrawals, and it takes, with an empty queue, it takes even 8 days for those funds to arrive on chain, and then you have to restake them again. So yeah, it takes a long time.
Yeah, so probably this is even like a minimal scenario, right? It's like in practice it might be 2 or 3 times that in like sort of opportunity cost if you. So yeah, really important to do it like intelligently, I guess. Yeah,
it's interesting. There were over the summer there was a big onboarding of Wave 5, and around that time some large node operators, they offered to eject some keys to give the new operators like a head start, like help them get up to speed quicker, get those keys redistributed a bit more.
yeah,
And we did similar calculations to figure like what that's going to cost, and it's it was at the time the queue was really long in the summer. I think it was 40 or 45 days, and the costs were just absolutely prohibitive to do such a thing. So it's in the end, like the new deposits and the withdrawals, they are quite high, and like there's a pretty large churn anyway, so it wasn't really necessary. But migrating is there's a massive cost associated with it, so that's very interesting to look at. Your research really makes clear the direction the staking router is meant to take the protocol in, as more like a marketplace of staking options, I guess. Well, not for an individual staker, but we have a big big bunch of stakes, and we want to allocate that to currently like an opinionated or a curated set of node operators. And now we're getting this DVT, which is all but simple, but that's what we're calling it anyway. We have the CSM coming up, and they all have different risk profiles, right? So DVT has a different risk profile from the curated set, and they also have a different risk profile from the CSM, which has the bond again, of a size to be determined at a later date. And this makes it interesting that it's not just the costs associated with these different modules of expressed in risk and reward and actual performance, but also the benefits, not in pure performance, but I don't know, I guess even scalability, which is like a major upside of the current curated set. But geographical distribution, client distribution, stuff like that, that's hard to quantify, while at the same time being very clear for anyone, like even remotely aligned with Ethereum values, that these are core values that should be worth a price that you're paying for it. And I think the framework you're trying to set up will help somehow to wrap our heads around this, the pricing of this marketplace. Have you found the same? Like, can you expand a bit on that?
Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, it's a very complex topic, right? And I think, Lido already took the step to, make following these values, right? And introducing things like simple DVT and community staking to kind of address the larger market of validators. And ultimately, I guess there's a question, how do you now what, right? I guess that was sort of like the moment where I was like, okay, there's probably some work to be done to find out, what's actually the best way to now utilize these modules, and wanted to look into that a bit, try to make sense of it. It involves a lot of like nuance and subjectivity, so that's why in this evaluation part I also definitely urge people that are interested in this to take sort of their own thoughts about it, and ultimately trying to find out what the right path could be for Lido at large to like kind of make some sort of discussion happen. So that was my goal. I hope it provides that background for people that have the time to read it and dive into it. But yeah, super interesting question, and
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. It will help in going forward, and I think that ultimately that's the goal, like just to open up discussion, so we have this massively powerful router, and we can route it wherever we want. So where do we want it? Like what now? That's a good question. Looking at the time, thanks again, Felix.